The call came at 3:47 a.m., and I almost didn't answer. 23 years on the force had taught me that nothing good arrives before dawn. But König, my German shepherd, 5 years old, already stirring at the sound of my phone, knew better. He'd learned that sound meant work, meant purpose, meant we were needed. "Yeah," I said into the darkness of my small cottage outside the city. The voice on the other end belonged to Detective Sarah Chen, someone I actually respected from my final years on the department. We found a body in Ashton Mill. Female, 20s, barely alive. Medical examiner says she's been there since last night. Maybe longer. The property belongs to Vincent Caruso. Caruso. Even Koenig's ears perked up at the name, though he couldn't possibly understand it. The man had been untouchable for 15 years. Connections that went up into City Hall, down into the underworld, everywhere in between. The department had built 3 cases against him. 3 times witnesses vanished or recanted. The last detective who pushed too hard got reassigned to traffic enforcement. "Why are you calling me?" I asked, already moving toward the door. "Because she's asking for you specifically. Says she knows you. Won't talk to anyone else. And because the brass is going to bury this before breakfast if we don't move fast." I hung up without another word. König was already at the truck, tail low but steady. He knew the tone, the mission. We'd left the department together 3 years ago, both of us too used up for the official world, both of us unable to walk away entirely. The rain started before we hit the highway, cold, relentless, the kind that washes evidence away. Ashton Mill had been abandoned since the 90s, a hulking brick skeleton on the eastern edge of the city, the kind of place that existed in the gaps between law and consequence. By the time we arrived, the scene was already contaminated. Rain, wind, footprints from at least a dozen uniforms who didn't know better. Chen met me at the entrance, her face tight. "She's inside, 3rd floor. They moved her to keep her out of the weather, but technically we haven't touched anything else." König stayed close as we climbed, his breathing steady, his presence like an anchor. He'd worked search and rescue before I retired, before the weight of 23 years had bent my spine and hollowed out something essential in my chest. The girl was in the corner of an old office, lying on a shipping blanket someone had found. She was pale as bone, her clothes torn and soaked through, but her eyes, when they found mine, held recognition and fear and something else. Something like hope that had been beaten almost all the way out of her. "Detective Mercer," she whispered. I knew that face. Sarah Donnelly, 17 years old. I'd helped arrest her father when she was 5, a mid-level dealer who'd beaten her mother half to death during a custody dispute. The girl had testified, had been brave in a way children shouldn't have to be. I knelt beside her, keeping König close. His presence seemed to calm her, the way it always did. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "They said—" She coughed, and there was blood in it. "They said you'd know. They said if I survived, I should tell you. That you'd understand what they took from me, that you'd know why. Who did this?" She closed her eyes. "Caruso. But it wasn't about me. It was about—" She stopped, pain flickering across her face. "They wanted to send you a message about the old cases, about you keeping your mouth shut now." The rain hammered against the broken windows. König pressed his head gently against her hand. "You're safe now," I said, though I wasn't sure it was true, but I knew what I had to do. And I knew Caruso had just made the first real mistake of his life. Epilogue thought, some messages are written in blood and silence. Some answers only come when you refuse both. Chapter 2. The past. Tense. Back at the emergency room, Sarah Donnelly was in surgery for 3 hours. The doctor said she'd been hit multiple times with something heavy and blunt. Her left arm was broken in 2 places. 3 ribs cracked, internal bleeding that they were still assessing. Whoever had done this had wanted her to survive long enough to be found, long enough to talk. I sat in the waiting area with Koenig at my feet, running the timeline in my head. Sarah had been missing for 2 days. Last seen, leaving her shift at a convenience store near the university where she was studying criminal justice. The irony wasn't lost on me. Chen found me around 6 in the morning, 2 cups of terrible coffee in her hands. "She's stable," she said, sitting beside me. "Waking up soon. The rape kit came back negative. They didn't sexually assault her. This was pure violence, pure message." "What message?" I asked, though I already knew. "The brass thinks it's random. Wrong place, wrong time. Girl in the wrong neighborhood." Chen's jaw tightened. "But you know better. You know who she is." I did. Sarah Donnelly had been the keystone in the Caruso case from 2007. She'd been 5 years old then, but her testimony about what she'd seen in her father's apartment, the weapons, the money, the men coming and going, had helped bring down one of Caruso's early supply chains. Her father had taken a plea deal rather than face her in court again. "Caruso's reminding me that I left," I said quietly, "that the game didn't stop when I stopped playing." "Can you prove it?" "No, and we both know he knew that when he did this." Koenig shifted his head onto my leg, sensing the weight in my words. The dog had always been better at reading the emotional landscape than most humans. "What are you going to do?" Chen asked. I didn't answer immediately. 3 years I'd been retired. 3 years of early mornings with Koenig, of working private security jobs that paid well and asked nothing, of trying to believe that stepping away meant stepping out. That retirement meant surrender. But Sarah Donnelly, brave, broken Sarah Donnelly, had remembered my name in her pain. "I'm going to talk to her," I said, "and then I'm going to do what I should have done 15 years ago." Chen nodded slowly. She didn't ask what that meant. She already knew. Chapter 3. The Thread. Sarah was awake by 8, sedated enough to be calm, but alert enough to talk. The hospital had assigned her a private room. Chen's doing, I suspected, using whatever political capital she had left. The girl's mother was there, holding her daughter's unbandaged hand, her face carved from grief and rage. "Detective Mercer," she said, standing when we entered. "I heard you were coming." "How is she?" I asked. "Alive. That's what matters right now." I nodded to Koenig, who moved to the corner of the room and lay down, his presence immediately shifting the energy. Something about the dog's calm seemed to give permission for the truth to exist without drowning in panic. Sarah's eyes found mine. "Thank you for coming." "Tell me what happened," I said, pulling a chair close. "Everything. From the beginning." She took a breath, wincing at the pain in her ribs. Her mother squeezed her hand. "I was leaving work. There's an alley I use as a shortcut to the parking lot. I didn't think about it. I do it every night. 2 men grabbed me from behind. They didn't speak at first, just forced me into a van." Sarah paused, swallowing hard. "They had a photo of you, and they kept asking if I knew you, if I remembered testifying, if I understood what I'd cost them." "But who were they?" "I don't know. I never saw their faces clearly. But one of them, the one doing most of the talking, he said he worked for someone who wanted to send you a message, that you'd understand it was time to stop digging, time to stop being a problem." "Did he mention Caruso by name?" "No. But he said the name of the place, Ashton Mill. He said it was where my father was interrogated back in 2007, that it was full of memories I should understand." The connection crystallized. Ashton Mill had been a police interrogation facility before it was shut down in 2008 following budget cuts. I'd taken Sarah's original statement there, in a small room with afternoon light coming through barred windows. She'd been 5 years old, sitting on a booster seat, her feet swinging in the air as she described the guns in her father's closet. They beat you there? I asked. They wanted information about whether you were still active, whether you'd help anyone who came to you with evidence against their operations, whether you could be intimidated or silenced. I felt something shift in my chest. Caruso was fishing. He was probing for leverage, for weaknesses, which meant there was something he was afraid of, something that made a retired cop dangerous enough to beat a girl senseless. If you're following this rescue so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from, I said quietly, not to Sarah, but to Koenig, who lifted his head at the familiar phrase we used when we switched modes from private investigation to documentation. We're going to need to record this properly. Sarah nodded, understanding what I meant. She was going to tell her story officially. We were going to build the case that Caruso thought he'd already won. Her mother gripped her hand tighter. Koenig's tail thumped once against the floor. The thread had been found. Now we just had to pull it. Epilogue thought, messages written in violence always contain truth if you're brave enough to read them. Chapter 4. The Investigation. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in moving sideways through the system. I couldn't touch this officially. I was retired. No badge, no authority. But Chen could, and more importantly, Koenig could do what Koenig had always done, follow the scent of truth through the noise. We started with the van. The hospital had security footage of the parking lot, grainy but clear enough to show a white utility van, license plate partially obscured. It took Chen 2 days of bureaucratic maneuvering to get the plate registered to a shell company that led to another shell company that eventually traced back to a property management firm with known ties to Caruso's organization. The driver was a man named Marcus Webb, low-level muscle with a rap sheet a mile long. When we found him, he was already dead. Heroin overdose, the coroner said. But the timing was too perfect, too clean. Caruso was erasing footprints. I visited the scene of Sarah's abduction twice. Koenig worked the alley the first time, his nose picking up traces that had already been contaminated by rain and foot traffic. But German shepherds are built for this kind of half-finished puzzle. They find signal in noise. He marked the spot where the van had likely waited, then the route between there and the street. The dog's body language told me what I needed to know. They'd been professional about it. No panic, no hesitation. These weren't random criminals, I told Chen over coffee at a diner that had become our unofficial headquarters. These were contractors, people Caruso hired specifically because they could do the job and disappear. So Caruso's worried about something, Chen said. Terrified, I corrected. This kind of move is expensive, risky. You only do it if you think you're already losing. What I didn't tell her was that I'd started making calls of my own. Old contacts, people I'd worked with over the years who'd moved into federal positions or private investigation, people who had long memories and longer reach. What I learned was this. Caruso's operation had been quietly fracturing for 6 months. A major supplier had been flipped by the DEA. A lieutenant had started an unauthorized side business that was bleeding territory, and somewhere in the middle of it all, there was evidence, documentation, names and dates and financial records that someone, somewhere, had decided to share with federal authorities. Caruso thought I had it, or worse, he thought I could get it. He was half right. Chapter 5. The Debt. On the 4th day, I received a visitor at my cottage. It was late afternoon, the kind of golden light that only happens in autumn. Koenig alerted first, his ears up, his body language signaling familiar but cautious. The man who stepped out of the unmarked sedan was Agent Thomas Reeves, FBI, someone I'd worked with tangentially on a case in 2015. "Mercer," he said, hand extended. Koenig accepted the greeting, his nose confirming what his instincts had already told him. This was someone in authority, but not a threat. "Reeves, you're working federal now." White-collar crimes unit. Organized crime division. He smiled without warmth. We've been watching Caruso for years. We know about Sarah Donnelly. We know about the attempted intimidation, and we know you've been making calls. I gestured toward the porch. We sat, Koenig between us, watching the tree line. What do you want? I asked. We need you, Reeves said simply. Not officially, we can't use anything you gather, but we need you to keep moving, to keep pushing. Because someone in that organization is going to panic and reach out to you to offer information, protection, a deal. And when they do, we need you to have documentation, to have Koenig there, to verify the location and the witness, to have built enough pressure that the whole thing collapses. You want me to be bait. I want you to be what you've always been. Someone people trust when they need help. I was quiet for a long time, watching Koenig's ears rotate toward a distant sound, probably an owl in the pines. If I do this, I said, I do it my way. I protect Sarah Donnelly completely, and when it's done, Caruso goes down for the assault, not just for organized crime. Reeves nodded. We can arrange that. He left an encrypted phone on the table between us and walked back to his sedan. Koenig didn't move until the car was gone. Then he rested his head on my knee. The dog had always understood when the weight had shifted, when the mission had become personal. I had a debt to Sarah Donnelly, and Caruso had just given me the opportunity to pay it. Chapter 6. The Pressure. The next 2 weeks were a study in controlled escalation. Chen filed a formal assault complaint with the DA's office, attaching Sarah's statement and the forensic evidence from the mill. Nothing would stick without more. Just the word of a traumatized teenager against the reputation of a man with an army of lawyers, but it created a record, a paper trail. Something that federal authorities could use to justify a deeper investigation. I started being visible again. I visited known Caruso properties. I attended a community meeting about violence in the city and asked pointed questions about organized crime. I made sure people knew that Sarah Donnelly mattered to me, that the assault mattered, that I wasn't going to forget. Koenig worked the streets with me, his presence adding weight to every appearance. A German shepherd is a symbol of authority even when his handler carries no badge. People remember dogs. They remember what they mean. On day 9, my encrypted phone buzzed with a message. Need to meet, have information, bringing leverage. The sender was David Cortez, a man I'd known tangentially from my police days, a money man who'd worked the fringes of Caruso's operation. He wanted to talk at an old construction site on the north side, midnight. I told Chen, showed her the message, and we set up surveillance. She positioned 2 undercover units in surrounding buildings. Koenig and I walked into that dark site like we'd done it 1,000 times before. Cortez was alone, nervous, holding a manila envelope. The assault on the girl, he said without preamble. It was unauthorized. Caruso didn't approve it directly, but he let it happen. Let it be done to send you a message about the Donnelly case. Cortez extended the envelope. I'm getting out. I'm taking a deal with federal authorities, but I wanted you to have this first. I wanted her to know that someone inside that organization knew it was wrong. Inside the envelope were financial records, wire transfers, names of people who'd benefited from silencing witnesses, years of documentation that painted a clear picture of Caruso's operation. Koenig's body language never changed. The dog had learned long ago that important moments are often the quietest ones. Why? I asked Cortez. Because I have a daughter, he said simply, and I don't want her to grow up in a world where men like Caruso get to decide which girls are acceptable casualties. He disappeared back into the darkness before I could respond. Chen emerged from her surveillance position a moment later, having recorded every word. If this story has you hooked, hit like, it helps us bring more true rescues to light, I said into my encrypted phone to Reeves, who was monitoring from a secure location. "We have everything we need." The trap had closed. Caruso didn't know it yet, but Koenig and I had led him exactly where he needed to go. Chapter 7. The Collapse. 48 hours after Cortez handed me the evidence, federal authorities moved on 6 locations simultaneously. I watched it happen from my cottage, Koenig at my side, as the news reported on the largest organized crime bust in the city in over a decade. Caruso was arrested at his home, documents seized, financial accounts frozen. By evening, his entire operation had begun to unravel. The beauty of it was that I was never officially involved. The evidence came from Cortez, a cooperating witness who had flipped. The federal investigation was clean, airtight, built on legal warrants and proper procedure. My presence in the periphery never appeared in any official report. But everyone knew. The streets knew. The organization knew. And most importantly, Sarah Donnelly knew. I visited her in the hospital the day after Caruso's arrest. She was sitting up now, the initial shock of pain beginning to fade behind the harder work of healing. "It's over," I told her. "Did you—" "No," I said, cutting her off gently. "Federal authorities did, because you were brave enough to survive and testify. Because someone inside Caruso's organization realized this was wrong. Because people who believed in justice kept moving forward." Koenig approached her carefully, and she reached out to stroke his head. The dog rested his chin on the bed, his presence a kind of benediction. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you heal, you finish school, you become whatever you want to become, and Caruso sits in a federal penitentiary. Will they prosecute him for what he did to me? The federal charges will likely include conspiracy and assault through intermediaries," I said honestly. "The case is strong enough that his lawyers will probably recommend a plea deal on most counts. You might not have to testify in open court. The documentation might be enough, but if you do, we'll be there. I'll be there." She nodded, tears on her cheeks. Not from pain this time, but from something closer to peace. Koenig's tail thumped once, twice, then settled. Sometimes justice moves slowly, but when it moves at all, it can be beautiful. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. The trial didn't happen. 3 months after Caruso's arrest, his legal team negotiated a plea agreement. He admitted to racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. He admitted to orchestrating the assault on Sarah Donnelly through intermediaries. He was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. Sarah graduated from high school in the spring. I attended the ceremony with Koenig, sitting in the back, watching her walk across the stage. She found me in the crowd afterward, hugged me carefully around my chest to avoid her still healing ribs, and whispered, "Thank you." "You did the work," I told her. "You survived, you testified, that's what matters." Chen was promoted to lieutenant detective. She set up a task force dedicated to cold cases and witness protection. I became a consultant, officially off the books, but available when cases needed someone with Koenig and 23 years of instinct. Reeves sent a message through the encrypted phone. "Good work. Agency appreciated the assist. Contract available if you ever want it back officially." I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to rejoin the machine, but I was ready to acknowledge that retirement didn't mean silence. Koenig had changed too. After 3 years of easy mornings and quiet afternoons, the dog had remembered what he was made for. His movements had sharpened. His focus had returned. He was happier this way, with purpose, with work, with the knowledge that we were moving in the direction of justice. One morning in May, I took him to the spot where Sarah had been found. Ashton Mill had been scheduled for demolition, but the construction had been delayed by the ongoing investigation. The brick structure still stood, rain-stained and heavy with history. Koenig walked through it with me, his nose cataloguing the memory, not of that night specifically, but of the fact that we had moved through here together, and that our presence had meant something, that it had changed the trajectory of a girl's life. I found the room where I'd taken Sarah's statement 20 years ago. It was empty now, just a space holding dust and abandoned purpose, but I could still see her, 5 years old, feet swinging, voice steady as she described the guns in her father's closet. That courage had shaped everything that came after. Koenig pressed against my leg, and I understood. This was closure. This was the moment where we acknowledged that the work was complete, the debt was paid, the circle was closed. We turned and walked back into the light. Chapter 9. The return summer came with a clarity I hadn't expected. Sarah Donnelly started her freshman year at the university on a criminal justice scholarship. She'd written a victim advocacy paper that was published in the university's law review. She'd begun speaking publicly about her experience, carefully, with therapy support, but with her voice intact. One afternoon, she called and asked if she could visit the cottage. I said yes. She arrived on a Saturday with her mother, both of them carrying quiet confidence. We sat on the porch, Koenig resting between us, and she talked about her plans: graduate school, federal law enforcement, a career in victim advocacy and witness protection. "You taught me something," she said to me. "You showed me that stepping away doesn't have to mean abandoning the work, that you can be retired and still matter, that sometimes the most important interventions happen outside the system." "I learned that from you," I said honestly, "from your courage." "Will you keep working?" she asked. "With Koenig? Keep doing what you just did?" I looked at the dog, who was watching the tree line, ears alert, body still. He was old enough now, 8 years, that people might have expected him to rest. But there was still clarity in his eyes, still purpose in his movements. "Yes," I said, "as long as Koenig wants to, as long as people need help." "Good," Sarah said, "because there are a lot of people like me out there. A lot of girls who need to know that someone's watching, that someone still believes in justice." After they left, Koenig and I sat on the porch as the sun moved across the sky, painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose. The dog rested his head on my knee, and I thought about the meaning of retirement, not as an ending, but as a transformation. Not as stepping away, but as stepping back to see more clearly what actually mattered. The next morning, I received a message through Chen, a missing person case, a teenager, last seen 3 days ago in circumstances that suggested foul play. Could Koenig and I help? I called the family immediately. "We'll find her," I told them, and Koenig, hearing the shift in my voice, stood and shook himself, ready. Ready for the work. Ready for the next girl who needed someone to believe in her survival. The dog and I walked into the world again, not as we had been before, but as we had become, scarred by experience, strengthened by purpose, and absolutely certain that justice, when it finally arrives, is worth every step it takes to reach it.